Once again, teachers are being delegated the responsibility of doing that thing that parents should have done long ago. We're now being told to enforce a ban on smartphones in our classrooms, and mark my words, without strict and punitive enforcement, these bans are nothing more than hollow rhetoric. I've been a secondary teacher for 15 years, and with the onset of these bans by school districts and state legislatures, I fear they won't be effective unless we educators do something ultra-reactionary, and that reactionary measure should be to allow these devices into our classrooms so that we can neutralize them. Because as we all know, we cannot control anything outside of our classrooms. As evidenced by the slew of statistics I've shown, it's pretty damn bleak for educators. And if we aren't prepared to enforce these smartphone bans beyond just giving a verbal warning, we're going to have one hell of a battle on our hands from the start of day one. Every educator knows the stats. Student social emotional issues are at an all-time high, while student academic performance has cratered to lows not seen since the 1990s. Chronic absenteeism has led to nearly 40% of students not being at grade level in at least one subject area, and more parents are choosing to defund public education by pushing their kids into voucher programs. We are in a state of all-out war, and smartphone bans are the latest thing which could finally cripple our once pioneering system. My sneaking suspicion is that these bans are going to be used against teachers by politicians and parents. With any kind of policy, there must be some sort of tangible result. The result, I believe, which will be the metric to judge the success of these bans, are test scores. And if schools ban smartphones under the assumption that the ban will lead to an increase in student attention, and by extension, greater rates of content retention and skill development, then teachers will be held accountable if their students don't perform, which every teacher will agree is fucking bullshit. So it's at this point I want to share two simple protocols I put in place at the end of last year that made dramatic positive changes in my classroom. Protocol 1 is incredibly simple. Regardless of grade level, your students should not be allowed to enter your classroom on their own terms. A steady stream of kids leisurely filing into your room unmonitored is a recipe for disaster if you are to implement any sort of ban. At the start of class, your students should be lined up with their smartphones out and visible. On day one, you should practice this protocol multiple times. Have students enter the room, take their seats, then be sent back outside to do it all over again. And again, and again. Your goal here is to teach students how to enter and consequently exit your classroom. This protocol will clearly define you as the gatekeeper, and the students will no longer have free access to your room. Proper entering and exiting will be vital to implementing protocol number 2. Here's where my argument gets interesting, because I'm advocating that all educators implement this ethically and potentially legally questionable protocol. Before a student enters your room, they should have their smartphone visible because you've put protocol number 1 in place, right? Well, protocol number 2 is this. As students enter your room, they must voluntarily relinquish their device. And notice I said voluntarily. Teachers, we are not in the business of confiscating personal property. And by making the action voluntary, you are putting the choice to join class on the student. If they choose not to relinquish their device, they are not admitted into your classroom. No discussion, no negotiation, no escalation. Simply turn them around, send them to an administrator, or make a call to the SRO. Do not allow them access to your classroom. That student has made the wrong choice, and they are not welcome in your place of learning. With all of these bans going into effect, educators must capitalize on the fact that we now have the moral and righteous high ground on this issue. If a student actively chooses to not relinquish their device, you are not denying them access to their education. They are. And as I stated in the title of this video, prove to me that I'm wrong. Show me concrete evidence that I cannot do this. Cite me chapter and verse in EdCode if you can. Because quite frankly, students have been denying themselves access to their educations for years because of their addiction to these soul-sucking screens. I am choosing to hand over the metaphorical shovel by which non-compliant students can continue to dump dirt on their own educational graves. If teachers are being delegated the role of enforcing a ban with no clear guidelines, then teachers must silence that sympathetic maternal instinct and refuse entry to those who the ban is intended to identify, so that we may teach to those students who wish to learn. If you haven't picked up on what I've been showing you thus far, then let me plainly spell it out. I'm not advocating you go and drop $30,000 on woodworking tools to build this ultra convoluted chest, but just wait till the end because it is pretty fucking rad. But I am saying, if you want to truly enforce this ban, then aluminum foil or aluminum foil tape should be the trendiest teacher accessories for the 24-25 school year. It's one thing to get students to relinquish the smartphones. It's another thing to go the extra step and neutralize them. The smartphone is only one part of this ban. All the other connected devices kids have, like earbuds, smartwatches, and gaming devices, are rendered useless by lining something as simple as a paper bag in aluminum foil tape. I've painted a pretty bleak picture of the state of our classrooms thus far, but let me tell you this. Towards the end of last year, I implemented all of these protocols, foil-lined bags and all, and I had zero issues with students. I think if you're stern and you create the expectation on day one, you'll find that our students are fairly in tune with the issues that smartphones have caused them. I also believe, even though I'm 6'3", 215 pounds, bald, bearded, and tattooed, that if you don't make these protocols draconian, but voluntary, the majority of your students will comply. Now, I can't guarantee you won't have the occasional blow up, but as long as you hold firm and don't escalate with them, let them throw their hissy fit outside of your classroom, and you be about your business. A few final points before I wrap up. I sure as hell hope I'm wrong about the accountability piece of these bans being tied to testing, but if I'm not, then one other step must be taken, and that's a return to what I affectionately call boring-based education, teaching to the test. I think you have to work under the assumption that test scores are going to be held over our heads, so we might as well be proactive and cram as much content and test-taking strategies into our students as possible. Secondly, if we neutralize the smartphone, I think we'll have fewer and fewer discussions about our lowest common denominator side of the bell curve. We'll be able to teach to the middle and perhaps be able to differentiate enough to keep the high achievers engaged. Next, if you're a younger teacher or a teacher in the middle of your career, the latter half of Gen Alpha is gonna kick ass. Just wait, the parenting pendulum has swung. The parents of those kids got the memo, and they are doing all that they can to make sure they don't repeat the mistakes of our current crop of parents. And finally, if you're a non-committal teacher who opposes strict and ethically questionable enforcement of these bans, get out of the way, because your lack of enforcement will only hamstring the rest of us that are actually trying to do what's best for students.